Welcome back to the Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is Kate, your host. I'm going to take just a moment for a quick update. I've gotten some really good feedback about the audio levels of the Comfy Chairs and wanted to let my listeners know that we'll be raising the volume for subsequent episodes. So you may want to adjust accordingly so we don't hurt your ears. Thanks again for the feedback. If anybody has ever called you an overthinker, how would you feel if they called you a deep thinker instead, or a strategic thinker? These questions are important ones that today's guest has asked herself and her clients, and she's answered with the idea that overthinking and deep thinking are two ways of using the same skill set. One brings more servings of anxiety and hesitation, the other offers growth and peace. I know which one I want in my life. Today we're going to explore how the ways we think and the motivations behind our thought patterns can impact our productivity, relationships, influence, and well-being. Basically everything. Welcome to the Comfy Chairs, Kim. I'd like to ask you to take a moment to introduce yourself.
Hi, Kate. Thank you so much. So I'm a lifelong overthinker. It's been overthinking everything for at least 4 decades, and that has taken me to many places, changing careers, changing countries. And through that time, a lot of it's been driven by anxiety. And so I've learned various ways to work with this, tame it, and figure out how to get things done and feel good about what I do and all of that, basically turning overthinking into expert thinking. And so now my mission is to help others do the same and make sense of the things that they're trying to do and achieve in their lives.
I love that. When I saw your profile in the podcast guest host matchmaker system, it's like, oh, this woman gets me. And I think in my note to you, I was like, I have this lifelong love-hate relationship obsession. I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it with overthinking.
Yeah, what do we do with all of this?
Yeah, so I feel like I have a lot to learn from you because overthinking, fretting is how we talk about it in my family, has been a thing in my whole life. And also, I can't think of somebody that I know that doesn't overthink at times.
Right.
And particularly, since I want to be here for people that are interested in leadership, I see leaders ruminating and worrying and fretting a lot. So I'm really excited for this conversation, both because I think it has so much relevance and I'm hungry for the insight that you have.
Well, I'm still learning every day, so I'm going to be learning from this conversation and all the conversations I have as well. So I don't have overthinking dialed. It always comes back. There's always more to fret about.
Yeah. Well, I'll quote my father here. It's a good day when you learn something new. So let's
every day's a good day then.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, where I'd like to start, Kim, you talk about thinking as a skill set, which I love. And I'd like to hear and discuss what skills you include in the framework for deep thinking.
Yeah. So I think that overthinking and deep thinking or expert thinking or any other form of more productive thought are basically the same thing. Just overthinking is driven by an anxiety, and the other forms of thought are driven by curiosity or other more productive things. And so it's the exact same skills that you're using, it's just towards different ends, different purposes. And some of those skills might be things like, so every overthinker I know has an amazing ability to focus, but yes, probably not on the most helpful aspects of a situation. They also have a very keen memory about replaying a conversation maybe that's in their head, rather than, let's say, if you're deep thinking, you're replaying or calling upon a memory of something else that might be more useful in some way. Same with rehearsing. That's another skill. And analyzing. really kind of picking things apart, digging deeper, and also gathering feedback, right? So just kind of going in and seeking in a memory or in a thought or with your friends, really trying to, you know, suss out like what do they think about this work situation, and it's
Mm,
always that drive to get new information or new insight or new angles to explore, maybe new answers to whatever it is that's vexing you.
great. Now, are those skills that you see as ones that we can develop? How innate are each of them?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it depends.
Yes, my favorite answer.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's going to vary
Hmm.
and from person to person. And I definitely think different overthinkers, different people are going to have different tendencies,
Yeah,
right? Just the same that some overthinkers are going to be really maybe in the rumination space, which is very backward looking,
yeah.
past looking. Whereas future trippers, they're in the forward space, right? Some people live there and some people live sideways in the overanalyzing space, right? So, yeah, I think you can probably you can hone those skills. I'm sure some of them people have a predisposition or a tendency
Hmm.
for, but I think the key thing is probably being able to rechannel or repurpose the skills.
Yes.
So use them towards better ends. So
Yeah.
instead of focusing on a past interaction that you really can't do anything about, learning how to put that focus on maybe what you can do to move forward or to let it go or to um, ensure future interactions are more of the type of things that you want.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with you that I think these are definitely learned and learnable skills. You may have a predisposition toward one way, a set of thought patterns, but from infancy, we observe how people around us are thinking and navigating things. And there are chances are that there were either explicit or implicit rewards throughout time that for those of us that overthink, we we kind of got rewarded for. We were incented, like, oh, I got a great grade on this
Mm-hmm.
test because I was so analytical, or
Right.
I ruminated so much on the mistakes I made last time that I avoided them this time. So
Mm-hmm.
I get the prize, I get the treat as a result of it, and that's probably and I'm this is sort of where in terms of how you coach, how do we unwind whatever sort of benefit we see and we experience as overthinkers, the pain and the pleasure, if you will. How do we unwind those two things so that we can apply the skills more effectively?
Yeah. And unwind, it makes me think of like unpack or make
Mm-hmm.
sense of. So
Yeah.
it's like, how do we almost separate these things and understand? I guess there's an underlying question there. It's like, what is really going on here?
Yeah.
What is this about?
Yeah.
Why am I ruminating? Why am I overthinking this? There's
Mm-hmm.
probably an answer. There's probably, um, let me put it a different way. There's probably something that you're seeking.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're searching in the data, you're
Yeah.
searching in the memory, you're trying to rewrite it. There's something that you're processing or working through. And that can be very, like you said, like pleasurable because it's almost like digging at something, or
Yes.
picking. And that
Yeah.
can be very gratifying,
Well, and I don't know about you. For myself, I when I am problem solving, like internally problem solving, I actually try to avoid why, because if there's a behavior that I'm addressing, it's not that the why isn't important, but what I've learned is if I ask myself why, that's where I get into my thought loop, because I may not be able to find the actual answer for why I am a way that I am, right? So it's instead, what am I doing? What are the circumstances around me that can contribute to that? And then what am I going to do different going forward? And that tends to, for me, this is very much my personal experience when, say, I'm trying to change a behavior. If I ask, why am I like this? All I'm going to do is ruminate and overanalyze. If I ask, what is it that I'm doing and what am I going to change? It puts me into a place of action. And I get the sense that as a coach, that's what you're trying to help people do. Is that accurate? And if it is, I would love to hear about some of the recommendations, the tools, how you help people identify and then rechannel. I love the word that you used.
Yeah. Yeah, redirecting the flow of energy, right? And applying those skills to better endeavors. Yeah, let's I love what you said. Let's unwind some of it. And because I think there was a lot of great little stopping points along this neat little journey. Um, you asked that question of like, is it accurate? And as a coach, my ears always perk up. And then I always want to just flip that question around and ask, is it accurate to you? Does that make sense for you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yes, it does.
Yeah. Because that's always the thing that matters. And it's so contextual. So it sounds like for you, you've identified that asking the why question is not productive. That's going to send you down a path that it's not useful information. And one of the things that I'm thinking as a coach, and then I offer it to anybody that they can self-coach and ask themselves this, is this question that I'm always asking, which is it useful?
Mm-hmm.
Is what I'm doing useful? Is this thing useful? Is this question useful? And for you, it sounds like the why question is not useful. It's not going to be helpful for you to know the root causes or sources. In fact, for whatever reason, that's going to prompt or trigger a whole line of thinking that is not going to be a healthy cue for you to engage in this other behavior that you don't want to be engaging in. It's not a productive habit loop for you.
I wish I could take full credit for that realization, but that is definitely thanks to therapists. So hats off to the people that guided me to that understanding.
I do think you can take full credit though for it because you did the work. You internalized it and you made it make sense for yourself.
So the question that you ask all the time, is it useful? Talk to me about why that works, because I see it as being wildly effective.
That makes me curious again, because there's something about your intuition that's going, yeah, that lands. Do you have, before I answer, do you have a better sense or a hunch or kind of why that's useful?
Well, I think let's start there. That's always the position. Here's what I think, Kim, that because overthinkers are typically trying to problem solve, to make improvements, to better things, that the question of is it useful is going to sort of directly hit at this may not be the best way to talk about it, but the cost benefit analysis of,
right. Yeah.
If I'm taking all this energy, all this time to worry out a problem or a concern, for some reason I've decided that that's a good use of my time and energy. Whether that's through mental gymnastics or, again, there's been some sort of intrinsic or extrinsic reward in the past for it. But by breaking the thought pattern with a question, which we know can always be effective because it engages our prefrontal cortex in a different way, but by asking, is it useful, it makes that overthinker, in this case, I will say it's me rather than them, it makes me stop and understand, like, am I really going to get what I want by thinking this way, or even thinking at all?
Yeah.
And it's also, it's a beautiful, because it's closed-ended. It's, well, no. Okay. I should probably stop then. If the answer is yes, well then, okay, I'm on the right path. And as long as I'm not, again, doing mental gymnastics and kind of lying to myself about it, it's a really clear yes, no.
Yeah. I love this, and it's such a great explanation of that. I hadn't thought about it that way before, or I haven't even thought about this question that deeply before. So this is fantastic. But you're right. It's a great example of how a closed question can be useful, can be good, because we're always, as coaches, you're always told that, like in your training or and in many other talk modalities and mediums, it's like, oh, always ask open-ended questions. But that's not always the case, and sometimes a little pattern interrupt, something that just makes us stop and recheck the map, check the time, it's like a little sense check with yourself that goes, wait a minute. And you step back and you create just a little bit of distance to be able to look at it and go, what am I doing here? Is this, is it useful? And like you said, I love that. The answer is either yes or no.
Yeah.
And you pretty much know, because you're taking all of that. You're already in the place of focus. You're already in the place of analysis and digging. And then you just momentarily step back and redirect all of that thinking to whether you're going to get, like what you said, am I going to get what I want? Yeah. Which just shows the desire that we have, the tenacity that we have when we're in that space of like, we really do want something. We really do want the answer to solve this. And that gives us a way to step back and ask if we're on the right path.
Well, I think it's also a doorway to asking, well, what exactly is it that I want? Because in my experience, both personal and in talking with other people, that rumination or future tripping or over-analysis, it's not always focused on something. That's when it's overthinking as opposed to deep thinking, because it's just worrying over the same thing, whether it's, oh, this embarrassing, awkward moment I had when I was 10, or something that I said in a meeting that my boss didn't respond the way I wanted them to. Well, what are you trying to get by thinking about that? And breaking the cycle, hitting pause with a yes, no question, because it cuts you off, in some ways literally, then you can start thinking, well, if it's not useful, what would be?
Yeah. So it opens up possibilities.
Yeah.
And you also brought up something there that I think highlights a difference between overthinking and deep thinking. And overthinking is busy, but it's not productive.
Yeah.
And we, in so many ways and areas of our life, we conflate those two. And it gives us a chance to questioning what we're doing, gives us a chance to notice, oh, we're just being busy, busy brained.
We do love busy productive. Though, right? That's interesting, Kim. I think that might be part of the big overarching problem of why so many of us get trapped overthinking, because it is busy, and busyness is highly valued, at least in Western culture. So if I'm always frenzied and occupied, I must be important.
Yeah, it feels productive, but there's no output that's helping you move forward. Exactly. And if anything, it's holding you backward, because busyness just drains your energy.
Right.
And the more your energy is drained, the harder it is to see and stop. Yeah. We're just kind of sinking into the sand.
Yeah. Last week I was doing a coaching session with somebody that we were referencing her everything disc style, which is conscientious. And, so very detailed, very like aware of right answers, wrong answers, wants to be right, wants to be expert, which sings to me because I have a CD style, conscientious and dominance. And we were kind of talking through how you're using your energy, where are you focusing it. As somebody with a conscientious style, you have this kind of superpower for details and expertise. And the example I shared with her of like where overuse of the skill, my husband and I had the opportunity to officiate a wedding for some friends. It's been almost 3 years ago now. And there are still days where the random thought will come through my head of what if we didn't fill out the paperwork correctly? What if our friends are not legally married? And the language I use is I'll get wrapped around the axle worrying that our friends are not legally married because maybe I didn't fill out the paperwork correctly.
Uh-huh.
And in talking with this coachee, I'm like, think about how much energy I am wasting on this concern that obviously doesn't really exist.
Yeah. Because if that were true, then it would mean what?
We'd have to do the paperwork again.
I'm sure somebody has gone down that road
Exactly, right?
to fix the
Yeah.
paperwork. But I mean, I think we all have some version of that story that
Mhm.
lives in our heads, right?
Yeah.
And there's a story under the story, which is what we make it mean if that were true.
Yeah.
What does it say about us or me if I didn't do the thing that I'd
Mhm.
intended to do?
Right.
You know?
Well, it's catastrophizing, right? Like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, I must have. One, it puts me at the center of things. It makes me a very important player,
Yeah, I love that.
right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is, you know,
So much riding. The whole marriage is riding on this.
right? It must be about me. Um, Other people's marriage, no, Catherine,
Yeah, you've
knock it off.
invalidated the whole thing.
Right? I think that's one of the things to watch for. If we're trying to rechannel to refocus ourselves, is like you. I love the question of, well, if it is true or if it does happen, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah. What's the
okay,
story?
yeah,
Yeah.
and in this case,
What does
well,
that say about me?
yeah, and then there's also the this particular set of circumstances. Am I really that important? Said with love,
Yeah.
obviously, but
Or
yeah,
am I defined by this? Like,
yes,
if that's true, and it says this thing about me that I'm this horrible officiator, and that means that I'm not qualified to do anything. I don't know. I'm just making things up.
exactly.
Then, yeah, what is, why does that get to define the whole rest of my future,
Hmm.
my present and my future?
Yeah. Well, I love that, Kim, because what we're talking about then is, value based thought and coaching, right? Because this is not who you are. You have intrinsic worth outside of whatever it is that you're concerned about, whatever it is that you are just, like wearing down smooth. It is not you. You have intrinsic value. You have worth. So let's take your little worry doll and set it to one side for a moment.
I love the worry doll.
Yeah.
I have thought gremlins, so I think of things
Gremlins.
similarly. And yeah, I have this one called Dread Buddy, and Dread Buddy comes and visits me
Oh.
before in the hours, days, sometimes, or even week before a meeting,
Mm-hmm.
and says, just wreaks havoc on
Right.
everything. But I've learned to befriend and tame Dread Buddy.
There we go. Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that process. I like the dread buddy. I love that, even though it's not a friend that you want.
No, but they're
Why
just
would you? Why
there.
would you want to befriend dread, Kim?
I think of it like this little gremlin that pops up and is like tugging at my sleeve.
Okay.
And it means well. It's trying to warn me about something. It's trying to say, look, you have anxiety. You have a fear about this thing that you're about to do. And I've shown up because you've not addressed any of these concerns or fears up to this point. So now I'm here. And befriending it, taming it, calling it whatever you will, is my way of saying, look, I get you're here. You can be here, and that's fine. I'll deal with you here by my side, but you're not going to disrupt my day. You're
Mm-hmm.
not going to derail my plans. I've got work to do. I've got things to do. And I think the bigger skill that I've had to learn is, and it's this ties into resilience and all this, is to to be able to sit with these
Mm.
feelings, these hard things. And, we can do hard things.
Yeah.
We can, show up to the thing when we're not feeling well. But it used to be that I couldn't. It used to
Hmm.
be that it was just, or I would get through, but it was a horrible, miserable experience. And I've found a
Mm.
way to just have the anxiety or have the feelings, have the dread, the doubt, and have it be lesser, have it be there. So have feelings, but not have them take over. They're information. They're telling me, yeah, this is something you care deeply about, but you're not going to get in the way.
I really like that, Kim. The thread that I hear running through that is a level of awareness, because literally you need to be able to name what it is you're feeling. It's not just I have good feeling, I have bad feeling. It's I have dread. And okay, what is dread telling me? Why has dread shown up?
Yeah. It's like, oh, dread's here.
Yeah, dread shows up for a reason. So if I can name that it's dread as opposed to anger or apathy or hunger, jokingly, then I've identified it, I've named it, and now I can look it in the face and figure out
Yeah.
what I need to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's another question we can ask ourselves there, which is something like, who's with me right now? Like who's here in the mix of
Okay.
all of my kind of voices, people who, live
Yeah.
rent free in my head and the little thought gremlins, like who's shown up today in this moment?
Yeah.
Who's with me? And sometimes my brain's really quiet and it's just me and flow and there's nobody here. And sometimes it's like I've got this little dread buddy companion today,
Yeah.
where it just, maybe I'm feeling not great and vulnerable and a little bit raw for whatever reason. I didn't sleep enough. And so
Mm.
there's just this like kind of tired little child worry doll with me today,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. But I think there's something really important with the naming and the identifying, because I think names and labels give form to the unknown. They help
Hmm.
us make sense of things. We
Totally
can
agree.
definitely take that too far, and I've come a long way in changing my view about labels and names for things, and especially diagnoses.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
it's on my list of like things I've changed my mind about in this past year. So it's kind of holding two thoughts of like, yes, yay labels, but not so much. So there's that. And
Yes.
then
I like that a lot, actually.
yeah, because there's a point where, again, is it useful? Where they just don't become very helpful. They become
Hmm.
more like badges, or
Yeah.
they become these group identity markers that then substitute and front for us in
Yeah.
a way that becomes maybe too centered and too much, in a way that's just not maybe as helpful. So yeah, it's again, that goes back to awareness. And I did not used to have awareness. I only got to this point through years and years of overthinking in unproductive ways, without awareness.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think for other people, it probably won't, hopefully it won't take as long to get there, because we've got tools and skills and coaches out there.
Hmm.
Gosh knows I needed one. There's lots of ways to, change can be small, and it can be impactful and quick as well. I think there's things I could have known that would have helped me along the path much quicker.
Yeah. That's a that is a form of rumination, though. I would
Yeah, I
I
just went
would
on one,
venture
didn't
to
I?
guess. Well, it's going to take what it's going to take,
Yeah.
right? And hopefully you learn the lessons you need when you need them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's all we can kind of hope for ourselves,
Yeah.
is that I'm learning along the way. And when I'm ready for a lesson, it will click in for me. And picking up and chewing on it constantly is probably not the best way to get there. And once I know better, am I doing better?
Yeah.
It's
I
something
think
I've
there's a lot to that.
enjoyed about a lot of kind of the ideas and the questions and the kind of the incidental coaching that you've been giving me in the last few minutes is how action focused it is. It's what do I do with it? Even if it's, I'm going to sit with my dread for a little while, let myself feel the feeling. It's not so that I keep thinking, it's so that I can act.
Yeah.
And action is possibly, I'm going to say this and I definitely want to hear your reaction to it. I think action is the antithesis of overthinking.
Yeah. Overthinking can prevent us from taking action. And sometimes action is what we need to do.
Yeah.
Even if it's small, maybe especially if it's small.
I think
It's
that's
just,
actually the thing is
yeah.
if you're trying to recover from overthinking, don't expect yourself to suddenly be 100% different. It's what are the
Yeah.
little steps that I can take?
Yeah. Almost the littlest,
Yeah.
and yeah, and just break it down into smaller and smaller bits. And sometimes that can be really, really impactful. I think of it like removing a splinter. A splinter in your finger can cause so much suffering.
Yes.
And the world is centered revolving around it. It's like your finger's throbbing and you can't think of anything else, and then you remove the splinter, and then all of a sudden you're able to move your whole body.
Yep.
You're able to free your thoughts and think about other things. Something you said a minute ago about yeah, being action oriented, it reminded me of that question of why, or any question that we ask ourselves is, okay, if I get the answer, what am I going to do with that information?
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the next logical question. That's a very action oriented question. Like, what am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
So if I'm chasing this answer of why, or I'm looking to label something, okay, what does that get me? What am I going to do with that when I have a label for something?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, sometimes that's very useful. And it's like, yeah, it gives me a way to identify it, and that's very helpful and it feels good. That's useful. Now I can categorize it. Great. And sometimes it's just not.
Yeah.
And we'll know,
Yep.
as the more we ask ourselves these questions.
So Kim, we've been pretty focused on the overthinking, the anxiety side of the
Mm.
equation, naturally. Um, but it's the other side where we are using our powers for good.
Yeah.
That I think it would be really fun, but also beneficial. It'd be useful for us to talk about the side of deep thinking, of curiosity. By my lights, I think the bridge between anxiety and curiosity is imagination, because I see those as being anxiety and curiosity are ways that imagination plays out in the world.
Yeah.
This is not an entirely original thought. It's based on a quote that I saw. Worry is imagination misapplied, if you will. It's a misuse of it, because I'm creating worst case scenarios. I'm imagining the worst that could happen, and that generates feelings of worry and anxiety in me. Where the other side is curiosity and imagination. When they're playmates with each other, there's so much possibility. How do you coach people to differentiate between imagination that results in anxiety and imagination that sparks more curiosity?
Such an interesting question. And I hadn't thought about that idea before, about the worry is misapplied imagination. Love that wording. I wonder if there's something about the direction of this. Like, imagination's the constant here, right? Imagination's the thing that is throughout all of this. Let's look at this a different way. My brain is going in too many
I
different
could see
directions.
it. I could see it on your
Yeah, yeah.
face. I love it. It's fun to watch you
I
think.
don't. Can you ask that a different way?
Oh, let's see if I can. I guess it's how do we learn? How do we learn to direct our imagination? or to recognize when imagination has gone awry.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Because here's sort of what I think of the sequence of events. I get curious about something. Right? I wonder
Mm-hmm.
kind of questions, or what if. So I start imagining. My curiosity has led me to this. I've thought through what could go well, what could go poorly. I've imagined how I'll respond to it, and it has prepared me. Dread has not been invited to the table. Or I immediately start creating these scenarios, and instead of being like, check, 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 I know how to deal with that, it just spirals, and I'm a bundle of nerves. Those things happen so quickly. So, what is the sense check that I need to be able to corral where my imagination goes?
Yeah.
Does that help?
Great example.
That was a
Yes.
longer
Yes.
question than the first one.
Yeah, but I think that the core question in all of that is, how do we shift from anxiety-driven imagination to curiosity-driven imagination?
Yes, that is the question. Thank you for capturing it inside of all of that.
And they're very similar, but they lead you down very different paths with very different experiential outcomes.
Yes.
So you show up to the podcast differently if you follow that thread of the anxiety-driven imagination versus the curiosity one. And sometimes that's useful. Sometimes we need to do a little bit of risk assessment and figure out, what, how to prevent some issues and then soothe ourselves. But there's a point where it's enough. And I think in any of those cases, because there's a sub question in there of like, how do we do the pattern interrupt? How do we notice that this is happening and stop it, or figure out what to do about it, right? So, because the answer might not actually be to stop it. It might be like, oh, let me do some disaster preparedness,
right.
That would soothe myself. I've been meaning to buy a backup mic anyway, or whatever it is. That comes with noticing. So that's always going to be the first thing. But that noticing, it follows a kind of general pattern. First, the noticing is going to happen after the whole thing. And, after the event has happened, and we look back on it and we go, oh, I see what happened there. I see how this led to that, and that's how I ended up being a bundle of nerves when I started the podcast, that sort of thing. But over time, more of that noticing will then shift to in the moment. I can see that I'm here. I'm a bundle of nerves. This is why. But then more of that, and we might notice and not be able to prevent it. We just see what's happening. And then with more noticing and more practice, we can see it before it happens. I've not slept well, and I can see that I've not addressed these concerns that I have. If I don't do something early on, I'm going to end up a bundle of nerves before I start, that sort of thing. But there's also, so that's like the kind of longer term view of how to do that. But there's little things I bet that we can do to just, I guess, sense check in the moment, to just give ourselves, and we just need to, it's just a small thing. It's just giving ourselves a minute, a pause. Is this useful? Or is this enough? Or something that gives us a little minute to step out of our, not even a minute, a second, to step out of our heads and look back. And there's probably lots of different things we might do. We might set a timer and have it be our I always set a timer I'm not saying I do this, I'm just making something up. I always set a timer 5 minutes before an event, and when that timer goes off, I know it's my minute to reflect, or something. Or building little practices, I guess, that do the pattern interrupt. And the more that becomes just a routinized habit, I bet that can help interrupt some things. And give yourself that space to just think and step back for a moment. So that's one thought. I'm sure you have some thoughts or ideas, maybe.
Well, I do.
What do you think?
And what I keep hearing us come back to is that the remedy is action. And it doesn't mean that you are acting, but is what I'm thinking about what I'm imagining, does it lead from, does it follow a path that leads to action?
Mhm.
Or does it follow a path that leads to concern, shame, dis-ease, bad feelings? I've imagined failure. And if it follows a path to action, like I'm going to be able to have another podcast episode
Mm.
just to, wear that example out, that if it leads to action, chances are I'm on the side of curiosity and growth mindset. If it leads to stasis, failure, what have you, chances are I'm on the side of anxiety. And to flip over is, well, if A, B, and C happen, it's the disaster preparedness. Okay, if these things are going to happen, what do I do to prevent them? What action do I take? That's what I think, again, the remedy is for it, is how do I act based on this? The concern I have, the scenario that I've imagined, or the bad feeling that's been generated, or even the good feeling that's been generated because I've imagined, profit and glory. Okay, well, what am I going to do then to get to that?
Yeah. So it's knowing the outcome you want.
Yeah.
Like, what's the outcome you want? I want profit and glory. Okay. Am I on that path?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the thing that needs to change is just tweaking a thought, just improving it a little bit better so that it leads to a slightly better feeling. It prompts a slightly better action, and then you get a slightly better outcome. And that can be the difference than yeah, just staying on the thought. Like the negative thoughts or the unhelpful thoughts we have, they can be such like worn grooves.
Yes.
That it's so much easier to go
they're
down
so
them.
Comfortable, right?
Yeah, yeah.
They're like the broken in shoes, or that warm, fuzzy, falling apart sweater. They're old friends a lot of times, and breaking up with them can be really hard.
Yeah. Or sometimes they're not even that comfortable, but they're just so familiar, and there's comfort in that. And yeah, but imagine if we could get so good at discomfort that it doesn't bother us. Like, we're never gonna love discomfort, but it'd be like, yeah, it's fine. That can be a little bit uncomfortable. That's fine.
Well, we're talking
in
about
whatever ways.
Developing a skill set, and there's a reason that we so often equate developing skills to like exercise and training, that you're building muscle, and there's going to be some discomfort, but it will be stronger at the end. You will be stronger at the end.
Yeah.
But Kim, we've tossed around some types of overthinking, the names that they're called. It is probably a good idea for us to pause in the flow of this conversation and really like name them. Rumination, future tripping, over analyzing are three that come to mind. One, can you walk us through those? And then two, if there are any that I've missed, would you add?
Yeah, yeah. So I think of that as like backwards, forwards, and sideways.
Okay.
So the backwards looking is the rumination, and that's the kind of circular thinking, the persistent thought loops. That's the replaying of something that happened, where you're just seeking to get some new information or trying to make sense of something that was in the past.
Yeah.
Right. And we can really overthink that. We can get stuck in that type of thinking. And then the future tripping is basically the opposite of that, where we're thinking about all the possible outcomes of what could happen in the future. So it's very forward looking, and that's imagining the worst, or even it can even be like worrying and wanting the best, and just fixating on that. It's that form of fixated thought, positive or negative, but just ultimately not helpful, not productive. And then the sideways one, maybe sideways. I don't know if that's the best way to look at it, but it's neither forward or backward, and that's the overanalyzing, and that's just going deep on a topic.
Yeah.
Really kind of sitting with something, sitting in something, stewing in it, picking it apart, replaying it in some way. It might not necessarily be a past or a future event.
As you were talking, I was thinking about one, some word meanings and some kind of cliches that have developed around each of those. And one of the ways I personally like disincent myself from certain behaviors is to make negative associations with them.
Yeah, that's great.
So like rumination, it's a beautiful word, isn't it? Rumination. It's
It
fun to
is
say.
until you know what it comes from.
And
Do you
then
know
when
the
you know what it
etymology?
comes from, it's absolutely gross. For people that don't know, a ruminant is an animal like a cow that ruminates on, in this case, it's cud.
Yeah,
Um, so
chews
it's
their
this
cud.
idea of I'm taking something back out, like, oh, from this stomach, it's coming back in, and I'm continuing to chew on it so I can digest it.
Yeah, I already ate it and I'm
Yeah.
gonna
And
re-eat it again and again.
yeah, well, cow's ability to do that is awesome and amazing. The idea that I'm just chewing on something that I have already eaten,
Uh-huh.
ugh, so
Yeah.
gross. Why would I want to do that? So I don't want to ruminate. I want to maybe consider, I want to reflect. But if it becomes so all consuming that I'm behaving like a cow, let me set that to one side. I don't want to do that.
It reminds me of like James Clear, author of Atomic Habits. He talks about the habit loop. And one of the things is to make the thing that we don't want to be doing or the behavior that we don't want to engage in, make the cue less visible. So it's less easy to do. Make the craving to do that less intense. Make the response harder to do,
Hmm.
and make the reward less great for having done that thing.
Okay.
And so by putting these negative associations with all of these things, we've reduced that craving a bit. We've
Hmm.
kind of made it less appealing and less rewarding to. And there's
Yeah.
probably more we can do in all of that to deal with the behavior we don't want. But there's always another side to this with behavior change that we tend to overlook as people, which is okay, well, what's the thing we want to do instead?
You got to
Like we
replace
don't
it with
change
something.
yeah, we don't change behavior until we know how to replace it. So what are we replacing it with? And whatever we decide what we want to be doing instead, we want to make that cue way visible. We want to make that craving like really intense. We want to make the ability to do it easier, and we
Hmm.
want to make the reward greater.
Yeah.
So in my mind, the easiest thing to do is to just shift the energy that we're the overthinking that we're doing, the thinking that we're doing, and shift it from the anxiety driven to the more curiosity, more productive. So we're just taking, okay, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, but I'm going to put it to a better end. I'm going to ask myself a better question,
Yeah.
or I'm going to, well, I guess we could, yeah, reduce the time that we're doing. We could try to lessen this, but one thing that might help is to start with just redirecting it. It's like redirecting traffic.
That's exactly right. I think replacing and being very intentional, like, all right, so if I'm somebody that ruminates, what am I going to replace that behavior with? What
Mm-hmm.
is what is its not evil twin, right?
Yeah. Like, what am I already doing? Okay, well,
Yeah,
I'm thinking,
I'm
like, why don't
thinking.
I just do that better?
Yeah. Well, I'm going back to the skills that you listed at the start of the conversation, like ability to focus. Well,
Yeah.
that's definitely happening during rumination. I'm definitely focused on a thing. I'm focusing on the bad outcome that could happen, for
Yeah.
example, because 3 years ago I did X and Y happened and I hated Y. So I'm stuck on that. Well, what if instead of doing X, I do Z, okay, let me imagine the great outcome that could happen because I change what I did.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I focus, instead of focusing on the bad outcome that I'm trying to avoid, I focus on imagining and daydreaming, if you will, about, or just dreaming about what could be possible
Right.
if I follow a different, set of steps or
Right. Like
instructions.
if I'm skiing down a hill and I'm worrying about all the trees that I might hit, if I only focus on the trees, I'm gonna hit a tree.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So
Yeah.
it's like let's shift, like be aware of the trees. You know, we don't want to just bomb down the hill with our eyes closed, but also, yeah, shift some of that focus.
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's something in the past, it's like I could focus on how it felt and, the overthinking loops. But what if I shifted that focus just a little bit to focus on, okay, what are the things I learned from that? What are the
Yes.
things that I don't want to do again? Or what do I know now? What if I focus on what I see now that I didn't before?
Mm-hmm.
That sort of thing.
We sort of touched on this a little bit, I think, earlier, but I want to ask it clearly still. And it's, do you think there's any value in this conversation about talking about nature versus nurture?
Oh, this gets back to some of the things we've covered.
Yeah.
There might be. It depends.
Yes, it does
let's go
depend.
back
It
to
always
let's
depends.
go back to that chestnut. But again, it's like, okay, is it useful to understand the reasons why? Is it better to? Is it going to be useful to understand if what's happening here is because of the way I was raised, or this predisposition, this way of being that I inherited from my parents or learned from people? Like, what am I going to do with that information? What are you going to do with that information?
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to help you, or is that just kind of figuring out sources?
Yeah.
um,
Where I think it could be beneficial to be aware of, this could be
I'm
somebody's
curious your.
nature, or this could be a result of everything that has led up to this moment. Where I think that might be useful is in leadership. So if I am the manager of an employee who has future tripping tendencies, who is constantly catastrophizing, their productivity is impacted. They're impacting the team by constantly worrying about all the things that could go wrong. And I need to coach and mentor them and help with their performance, acknowledging the fact that this may be intrinsically who they are, or this could be something that goes all the way back to their childhood, that their mom was constantly worrying about everything, so they worry about everything now. Just being aware that there may be factors that I don't know about that have contributed to this behavior, I think that's where it comes into play. That people who overthink may be doing it because of their nature, or they may be doing it because they've been nurtured, and acknowledging that and not being concerned so much about the why, but about how either of those cases can impact their ability to change over time. If they had a little bit of an inkling to it, and again, mom was a worrier, so they're a worrier, that goes back a really long time, and I can't expect instantaneous change. We don't have to talk about your family dynamics and the way your mom behaved when you were a child here at the workplace, but I need to understand as a leader that there's more than I see, and that I need to bring that understanding, that recognition, and that compassion for all the factors that could be playing into my employees' behavior that needs addressed.
What I'm hearing there, and I think this is a really good point, is like, what do I need to know to be sensitive
Mm-hmm.
and accommodating to people's needs,
Yeah.
right? And that doesn't require that I have all the information or that I become an expert, or certainly not become an expert in diagnosing or determining
Exactly.
sources. But, how much is enough? Because I think there's this other question here of like, what's happening now? What's in the room now? Does
Yes.
it matter really if it's a stemming from their childhood, or if it's a deep-seated issue? I don't know. It's, what's here now,
Yeah.
and let's
I
deal with that.
I agree. I agree. I think the nature versus nurture is academically a really interesting conversation.
Yeah.
Practically, though, particularly in the workplace, it doesn't matter. You've got to address the behavior that's happening. You need to do it with compassion. We've talked on the podcast before about trauma informed workplace practices. We've talked about, um, work as a sacred kind of spiritual act, and that we need to be aware of and honoring people's inner lives. So, just that consistently pulling through a empathetic, compassionate, and loving style of leadership. That's what matters, is what's happening now. What are the behaviors I need to address? And am I looking at this employee not as a problem, but as a whole person? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's key. And that doesn't require us to be experts. That
Yes,
allows us to be flexible. That
exactly.
allows us to be present and there, and doesn't put an undue burden on it. And
Mm-hmm.
I think your point about that being a useful or interesting or valuable question in an academic sense. So, like, maybe in another setting, it's
Mm-hmm.
really interesting and helpful to know, what these sources are. And, and then those people can do some really neat
Mm-hmm.
actions with those things. But
Yeah.
what do we need to know? What's enough as a leader in the space to be able to work through what's happening right now with my team in this dynamic and on.
I like that as a kind of not a full stop necessarily, but as a way for us to start closing up the conversation. That you can spend a lot of time thinking about the issues, the practices, the behaviors that go into overthinking. And at the end of the day, what matters is what's in the room right now.
Yeah, it's like, what's happening now? Who's here with me now? All these, worry dolls and thought gremlins,
Mm-hmm.
what's showing up, and how is that hindering or helping me?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and then we don't need to get credentials. We don't need to become experts. We just need to know ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's the work.
It is the work. Yeah. It's some of the hardest work out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's lifelong learning.
Oh, the best, the worst. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good day. We've learned something new. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this has really opened my eyes to, and ears and brain to a lot of new threads of thought.
Yeah. I do. I have a lot to
That was a
think.
lot of mixed metaphors.
It was. I love it. I love it. And I feel like I have a lot to think about now. And well, be careful. Don't overthink it, Kate. So, Kim, I would love to ask, since this is your space of expertise as a coach and consultant, what are some resources you would recommend?
Well, I'm going to be a little bit biased here. And the first one I'd recommend is my newsletter, which is called Hold That Thought. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
weekly newsletter where I send out three things. It's a very short read, but it's three links to resources every week around a theme to help people turn overthinking into expert thinking. So there's usually like a book or an article or a tool or something that's
Awesome.
um, useful there. Uh, there's always the usual suspects of books and podcasts. Um, um, One that I read recently, though, that I really like, that gets into a lot of this is Oliver Berkman's 4,000 Weeks. Um, and then a classic, James Clear's Atomic Habits, is a great one for thinking about habit loops. And we talked a little bit about that one earlier. I think outdoor spaces are underrated as a resource, as a tool that can help, and for a lot of reasons. But outdoor spaces facilitate walking, they facilitate talking, thinking space. There's so many resources out in the world. I think it's really about finding the channels that you enjoy and then doing the rest of the work, which is the thinking, the processing, the practicing, reflecting, and then writing, movement, and space are all good to help enable that. So writing is basically a form of clarifying thinking. And the more that you write in some way, it doesn't have to be prose, it doesn't have to be polished, it doesn't have to be shared or posted anywhere. It's just the process, the act of writing forces you to clarify your thought. If you're unclear about something, write about it. You'll get clearer. And then that practice over time, as you get better about writing out your thoughts, that will help improve your thinking as well, because you're developing that muscle that we were talking about before.
I love that recommendation. I really do. I'm a proponent of Julia Cameron's morning pages practice.
Yeah,
and a lot of times it is just that. It's the, here's what I'm worried about today.
Yeah.
And, okay, I can move on now. I've put it on paper. Yeah. And
I do morning paragraph.
Okay.
And if that, sometimes I even do morning sentence.
Hey.
I know that she suggests doing 3 full pages. I've never been able to do 3 full pages.
What I like about the full pages is, even if it's really just stream of consciousness, it's this commitment I've made to myself. Don't do it every day, but when I do, sometimes the 3 pages is just me writing the same couple of words over and over again. But
I love that.
It is a practice that helps with clearing.
Yeah. And I think the key for me that I heard in that is what you said about, it's the commitment that I've made to myself.
Yeah.
So whatever that is for you out there listening, what's that thing that you want to commit to for yourself that's going to help you, and that could be anything.
Well, I love yours. Like some days it's a morning sentence. The amount of self-knowledge and self-compassion and grace that's wrapped up in that is it's admirable. Amazing. It really is.
I never thought of it that way, so thank you so much for that. You've just reframed that for me.
I will make certain that there is a link to your newsletter. I know that you've got a subscription landing page, so people can check that out. It sounds wonderful. I will go subscribe myself.
Yay.
Right now. Is there anything else, Kim? Any closing thoughts?
No, just this has been wonderful to think out loud with you, and has inspired so many new thoughts in my head, and I hope it does the same for all the leaders and thinkers out there.
Same. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and all of your insight. If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to support the podcast, please subscribe, leave a rating or review, or share it with others. You'll find Comfy Chairs updates and other thoughts on leadership and learning on Instagram at 123 Limited. That's ONE23 LTD.